What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and in this video we are going to break down the 2022 schedule for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Before we take a look at the upcoming 2022 schedule, let's look back on the 2021 schedule. As you can see, Oregon, the big non-conference matchup for Ohio State last year, that was the game that Ohio State lost. You have to wonder, what if they had not played Oregon? What if this team had played 3 cupcakes in the non-conference? Their only loss would have come to Michigan. Would there have been a case for Ohio State to possibly make it into the college football playoff? Were they penalized for playing a big non-conference game? It depends on how you look at it. But yeah, they played Oregon in the non-conference, lost that game. Their other non-conference games were Tulsa and Akron, took care of business in those games. Ohio State, though, they improved so much as the season went on. They were a different team when they played Oregon than when they got to the month of November. Of course, did have a rough game against Michigan, a loss there at the end of the season. You look at the teams they played out of the West. They played Nebraska on the road, a Nebraska team that was obviously much better than their record. A Minnesota team that was actually pretty good. They played them on the road, and then they played Purdue, but they did not play Iowa, did not play Wisconsin. So overall, they had a pretty good conference schedule this past year, except the fact that they had to play Michigan on the road. That wound up costing them a shot at the Big Ten championship. So let's look now at the 2022 schedule. Of course, Notre Dame, the big non-conference game this year. Before we go game by game, let's look at who they play outside of the division, because of course they play every Big Ten East team. They'll play Notre Dame, just talked about that, Arkansas State, and Toledo. So you're playing obviously a really good team in Notre Dame, probably a top 10 team. Arkansas State and Toledo, those are a pretty good group of 5 teams. So if you're Ohio State, I think you like having these types of games. You're not playing an FCS team, or you're not playing a terrible group of 5 team. A team that's at least going to challenge you a little bit. Yeah, you're probably going to blow them out. You're probably going to be able to put the backups in the second half, but it's at least some decent competition. So they'll play those 2 teams. And then, what if they lose to Notre Dame? Could the same thing happen this year? Could Notre Dame cost them a spot in the college football playoff? That'll be very interesting. I think that might be the best non-conference game of the season in 2022. Really looking forward to that one. And then who do they play out of the West? They'll play Wisconsin and Iowa, and then they'll play Northwestern. So a tougher draw here with Wisconsin and Iowa, obviously, but I don't think it's necessarily tougher because they get them both at home, whereas they had to play both Minnesota and Nebraska on the road last year. Yeah, Wisconsin, Iowa finished ahead of them, but this time they'll get them at home. And Northwestern, I'm not really expecting to be all that great. So, yeah, it's a tougher draw just looking at the teams, but maybe it's really not that much tougher because you get both of these games at home with Wisconsin and Iowa. So back to the schedule here. They're open up with Notre Dame, first game of the season at home. Then they'll play Arkansas State and Toledo. So the 3 non-conference games there right to kick off the season. Of course, last year they played Minnesota to start off the season with a Big Ten game. This year they'll have the 3 non-conference games first. But like I said, that's going to be a very tough way to start off the season with Notre Dame. Ohio State, I think, probably will be favored in that game, but it's not going to be an easy one. Then they'll wrap up the month of September with a home game against Wisconsin. Nice test there early. So you look at the month of September, you've got Notre Dame and Wisconsin, 2 very tough tests, but both at home. So I think that bodes well for the Buckeyes. Going into the month of October, they'll play Rutgers, and then a pretty tough stretch here. Michigan State on the road. They do get a bye week after that before playing Iowa and then Penn State on the road. So 3 games that'll be pretty tough there. Michigan State, Iowa, and Penn State, 2 of those games on the road. And you look at the first 8 games of the schedule, it's not all that easy. You've got Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Iowa, and Penn State. 5 of their first 8 games should be tests for them. So this is a pretty tough schedule for Ohio State going into the month of October, or the month of November, I should say. They'll then have a pretty easy stretch with Northwestern, Indiana, and Maryland, games where Ohio State should be a pretty big favorite. Maryland could test them a little bit on the road right before Michigan. Should have a good offense, so don't sleep on that one. That could be a pretty good matchup there. But overall, those 3 games shouldn't be that tough. And then, of course, they'll finish off with Michigan. They do get Michigan at home. So I think there's a very good chance that Ohio State could go undefeated there in the month of November. What's going to determine whether or not this team will be right there maybe in the college football playoff, it's going to be those first 8 games. It's going to be from Notre Dame all the way down to Penn State. Yes, you've got Arkansas State, Toledo, and Rutgers in there, but the other 5 games will be tough games for the Buckeyes. They'll probably be favored in every single one of these games, but just because you're favored doesn't mean you're going to win, obviously. And so there will be some opportunities for them to trip up. It all begins there with Notre Dame. If they can win that game, build some momentum. Good news is you get Wisconsin and Iowa both at home, but a couple of really tough road games there. Michigan State and Penn State in the month of October. Those games could ultimately determine whether or not Ohio State wins the Big Ten East this year, or maybe they miss out like they did last season. So, like I said, schedule in 2022 in some ways is easier when you get Michigan at home, when you get Iowa and Wisconsin at home. But I think overall, this schedule probably a little bit tougher than the one in 2021.